So really excited to welcome Paul Van Oijen. Paul is a product designer based out of Waterloo, Ontario. He's currently working as a senior product designer at Shopify Plus, helping making commerce better for everyone. Paul work is majorly focused on some of Shopify's largest merchants. So this talk is all about failure. Let's jump in to learn more about that. Welcome, Paul.
All right, there we go. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to what I believe is the last talk of today. As mentioned, my name is Paul, and I want to talk to you today about failure. As mentioned, failure is something that is almost considered a bit of a taboo, a bit of a topic that no one really addresses. Like everyone experiences failure in their life, in their career, but they try to circumvent that. They talk about, oh, I learned this lesson, but they don't tell you how they learned that lesson. And I want to do exactly that. I want to tell you about the failures that I experienced in my career, the failures I experienced as a product designer, and the lessons I learned from that. But I want to walk you through those failures first. And before I do that, though, I want to take a step back. In fact, I want to take a lot of steps back, all the way to the year 1996. Now, 24 years ago, to be exact, in 1996, this is a great year for a variety of reasons. And a few of these reasons are, it was the debut year of the Backstreet Boys. I doubt there is anyone on this conference right now who has not heard of the Backstreet Boys. Super Mario 64 came out that year. It was a debut title for the Nintendo 64, and it sparked a lifelong passion for myself and probably many others. And last but definitely not least, and most importantly for this talk, I was 4 years old. Now, that is not me in the picture. I had to Google cute 4-year-old toddler boy, and I'm probably on some watch list right now, but it was well worth it. Now, at 4 years old, growing up in the Netherlands, you start going to elementary school at this stage. And in elementary school, you get asked a very important question. They ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? Now, most kids at that age, especially when they're 4 years old, they all want to be something cool. They all have something in mind that they've seen on cartoons or something they've heard about. Some examples of this are some want to be a fireman. They want to put out fires, save people. It's an incredibly cool thing, wouldn't you say? Especially for a 4-year-old. They might want to be an astronaut, exploring the outer reaches of space. Or they might be humble and they might want to be a doctor. I was not a cool kid when I was 4 years old. I did not want to be any of these things. That wasn't me. My hopes and dreams looked a little bit more like this, which coincidentally is also a great name for a racehorse, hopes and dreams. But that's what it looks like. Now you're probably thinking, well, I get it. Paul wanted to be the jockey sitting on the horse. Nope, I did not. So that only leaves one thing, and yes, I wanted to be a racehorse when I was 4 years old. It hadn't struck me that humans and horses were an entirely different species, that I couldn't magically evolve into a racehorse, but that's what I wanted to be. And I had a very clear explanation for this. Racehorses were incredibly fast, and I was a relatively slow kid at that point, a little pudgy. I wanted to be incredibly fast. Racehorses were incredibly fast. It all made sense. Racehorses are focused. They have one goal in mind, and they are incredibly determined to get there. And for these reasons, I really wanted to be a racehorse. And 4-year-old me didn't realize that wasn't possible. My parents were just laughing, as many of you might be. And they were like, just let him be. Now, fast forwarding to 2017, a few years into the future, I was living in Helsinki, in Finland. My wife is from Finland, which might explain how I ended up there in the first place. That's a beautiful country, and I was working in social advertising, social media advertising. I was working for a software as a service company that helped companies automate and optimize their social media. Now, working at this company, I had the opportunity to work with some of the biggest household names, you might say, in technology. And these companies had very different needs that we wanted to solve. And to understand what they really wanted, we at some point said, okay, we're going to focus on this group of very tech savvy, very advanced customers, and we're going to go to them in person. We're going to find out what they want. So using Helsinki as our home base, over the course of 2 years, I spent an incredibly large amount of time traveling the globe to meet face to face with these customers. I took an average of 36 flights a year, traveled for 150 days a year, which was much to the chagrin of my wife, who was just sitting at home at this point. And I conducted almost 200 interviews over the course of 1.5 years. All of this was to find out what our biggest customers really wanted, ensure that we were meeting their needs, and then also go back to them once we had identified that. Once they had said, Paul, we would like you to do XYZ, we would say, okay, we'll figure out how to do that. We would then go back to them a month later, say, like, this is our prototype. And 2 months after that, we'd come back and say, okay, you've been using the feature for a while. How are you finding it? Now, some of these companies, as I said, they're household names in technology, you could say. You could think of Uber, Airbnb, HelloFresh. These are just a number of some of our bigger customers. And these are customers that we were spending a lot of time with. And we were incredibly dedicated to these customers. We figured that whatever we would do, however we would build the product, we would do it with their help. They were essentially building the product for us. So we wanted to do this as fast as possible. We were incredibly focused and incredibly determined to do so. So as you might realize, I had in fact fulfilled my childhood dreams of becoming that racehorse. That wasn't without its downfalls, though. As mentioned, this talk is about failure, not about me becoming a racehorse. And as a racehorse, we end up at this failure. Now, an example of this is that while we were interviewing customers, we would hear something along the lines of, I wish I could query for active campaigns. Meaning, when looking at a list or an overview of their campaigns on social media, customers wanted to see only active ones. Now we see, I wish I could query, and we hear the word query, we think, oh, I know what that means. That means they want to query the database. That means they want to use something like SQL to pull their data. So what we did was we presented them with an interface that allowed them to create a sort of SQL-like abstraction to figure out what campaigns were currently active. So this would result in them getting campaigns that had spent over $0, so they were actually costing money, and they were in fact active, not archived or paused. And they had to type this out manually. It was a very weird interface to basically type in this abstraction of SQL. Now, if you're looking at this and you're not really sure what this is supposed to represent, that was also the reaction that most of our customers had. I would venture to say 90% of our customers were like, what is this? How am I supposed to use this? I don't speak code. I don't know what to do with this. And what was happening was that while customers said, I wish I could query for active campaigns, that was also literally what we heard. What they meant, though, and what we needed to interpret was that they wished they could filter for active campaigns. Querying the database, SQL code, none of that actually came into the picture once we understood that they wanted to filter. So what we ended up with was an interface that was much like this. Very simple. You can select what category you're filtering on, the operator, and the actual number. This is very simple. So once we had come to the realization that this is what customers wanted, we almost literally facepalmed and said, how did it take us months to get to this point to understand that customers wanted filters rather than a direct query of the database? Now, another example of that is toggles in our product. Our product had a lot of toggles, and I mean a lot of toggles. And most of those toggles were just that, a toggle, a name, and maybe a little tooltip to describe what it did. An example of that was predictive budget allocation. Now you would find this toggle in the tool as is, no explanation whatsoever other than this little question mark that was floating behind it. And this little question mark, if you clicked it, you end up in our documentation for predictive budget allocation. And that documentation looked a little bit like this. Now, you don't have to read the entire thing here. I won't read the entire thing out loud. Just the key parts here are Bayesian multi-armed bandit method and Bayesian posterior estimation, which once again led our customers to act like this. What on earth is a Bayesian multi-armed bandit? What is Bayesian posterior estimation? They weren't going to read this. No one realistically, unless they were data scientists, were going to read this and actually understand what was going on. Even those household names, the Ubers, the Airbnbs, even they were starting to complain, like, we don't really understand what was going on here. Like, how did you get from our questions and demands to something like this? And what we didn't realize is that we just needed to simplify it. They didn't need to know about all of this. All they needed to know was the predictive budget allocation moves budget between ad sets or campaigns based on their projected performance. And all we had to do as designers was add that line into the product. Word for word, we added that line into the product. And suddenly, customers understood. Usage rates skyrocketed, and people were actively using what we thought was our most valuable feature. And up until that point, we had trouble understanding why they weren't using it. And it was just because they didn't understand what was going on. We had failed to adequately explain what this feature actually did. And the reasoning for this is, as I said, we were interviewing our user base. We said we're going to interview our users, we're going to understand what they really want. But we weren't interviewing the user base. If we imagine this sphere as our user base, we were looking at a tiny sliver of that. The 1%, those household names, those Ubers, those Airbnbs, those HelloFresh companies. We've become fixated on these customers, and we were stubbornly going forward with developing features specifically for these customers. In some single-minded determination, we had figured that somehow it would trickle down. Somehow, if the most tech-savvy customers understood what we wanted, then surely the simpler ones would eventually get it. They would get to that level. We were that racehorse that I always wanted to be as a little child, but we had taken on the most negative aspect of what it meant to be that racehorse. Now I can tell you that this company imploded. And in fact, during a large stretch of time, it wasn't going so well. Our retention rates plummeted. We saw customers coming onto the platform and leaving within a week or two. And a great example of how this impacted the business was that we used to have a free demo. You could use the product for 2 weeks, not have to pay platform fees, and customers would figure it out themselves. It was simpler at that point, so they would be able to figure out what was going on, use the product by their own accord, and then after 2 weeks, they would be happy with it and start paying for the product. During the period that we were interviewing just the most tech-savvy customers, that 1%, what had happened is that that free demo wasn't good enough anymore. Customers would use it for 2 weeks, and then after 2 weeks, they'd say, I still don't really understand what's going on. Can we extend our free trial period? Can you help us out? And that free trial period ended up being replaced by guided onboarding. You were essentially assigned a customer success manager that would hold your hand for anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 months and literally be available 24/7 to jump on a call and explain the product to you. Because the product had become so dense and so focused on solving these niche corner cases for the 1% that was very badly explained and very awkwardly placed. And we had failed to essentially communicate what the product was supposed to do. But as I said, I would like to tell you that the company imploded, as it would be very beneficial to the point of this talk. It did not. We realized our mistakes. We realized that we were focusing on this 1%. And the company is doing very well at the moment. The company recently gained $200 million in funding. and is doing better than they ever would. And the reason for this is that we actually started listening to other parts of our customer base. We increased exposure to the customer base. We said, okay, we've now focused on these household names. That clearly isn't working out. The less advanced customers, the ones that are not as tech savvy, are dropping like flies. How can we figure out what they want? So we increased our exposure to those customers and our entire user base in general. And some ways in which we did that was exit interviews. As you might know, once you leave a company, someone from HR will likely contact you and try to figure out what they could have done to keep you at that company. They'll ask you questions along the lines of, how could we have improved to keep you here? How could we help? How could we have maintained your position at this company? And that's exactly what we did with our customers. Once they left, we asked them, what could we have done better? How could we have improved the product to keep you from leaving? Or if we were feeling up to it, we could ask them, what can we do to win you back? How can we get you back on our platform? Another way we addressed this was surveys. We had a survey that went out every 3 months, and it was largely ignored because things were going relatively well, we thought, until we started to see the actual numbers, the actual business impact of our failures. So we started to look at this, and especially the ones that rated us relatively low, we were trying to figure out what was wrong. If someone said, I don't understand, we dug deeper. We asked them, what in particular do you understand? Just to try to gain a better understanding of how our product was being communicated to customers. And lastly, the company had a mantra of everyone does support. That meant that everyone from the CEO to myself as a product designer was doing support in shifts. I did a shift 4 hours a week, every single week, being on the front lines with our customers. We had an integration into the product that allowed them to chat with us and directly reach out to us, ask them questions, explain their problems, and we would help them through it in real time. This was by far the best possible method for us to gather feedback, and honestly, one of the best experiences I've ever had in communicating with customers. Now, this is just one way in which we addressed it, but what we needed to realize first was that we were failing in the first place. And what I would like you to take away from that is two things, essentially. One is to just own your failures. I'm owning my failures by opening up to you right here, by talking to you about the ways that we misdesigned our product, essentially, and how that not only impacted the product and what customers were using on a day-to-day basis, but also just impacted the business negatively. It increased the workload for our customer success managers. And it was a failure on many fronts. But I'm owning that. When I interviewed at Shopify almost a year ago to date, I opened up about these failures. I said, look, I'm not the best product designer there is. I'm not perfect. But that allowed me to also share how I learned from that experience. And owning those failures, to me, just exhibits that you accept that failures are made and that you can learn from them in the first place. And secondly, knowing what not to do is as important as knowing what to do. You might listen to a conference talk, watch a YouTube video or a TED Talk, and they'll explain to you the lessons they learned. They'll explain to you what you should do, but that doesn't teach you what you shouldn't do. And making those mistakes, owning those failures, teaches you what not to do, which is equally important. With that, thank you for listening. If you have any questions, I would love to field them. If you have any questions after the conference, that is my Twitter handle right at the bottom there. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Paul. This was incredibly informative. I think you are on our Remote Design Week Slack, or would you prefer folks reach out to you on Twitter for any follow-up question? Either works.
Either is fine.
Great. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Paul. Hope you, again, tune into rest part of our day, our last day at the conference. And really, really glad that we got to host you and talk about this topic as the last formal talk of the day. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you. My pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.